Hello, everyone, and welcome back. So this week's Parsha is Parshas Vayeira. And at the end of this week's Parsha, we are told of the Akeidah, the binding of Isaac, arguably the hardest trial, the hardest test that Avraham would face. I'd like to focus with you on something that actually occurs in the aftermath of that particular trial, that is actually an outgrowth of that particular test. But to do so, we have to first really examine and understand a little bit of the headspace, to get a little bit of an insight into the headspace of Avraham Avinu during this trial and why it was such an incredibly difficult test. You know, in last week's Parsha, where Hashem says to Avraham Avinu, he says, Avraham, scharcha harbe ma'od, you have incredible reward waiting for you, not just in this world, but in the world to come. Avraham Avinu says something very, very telling. He turns to Hashem and he says, Ma titinli, what could you possibly give me? Yeah, I'm sure the reward in the world to come is very nice, but truth be told, it's not that meaningful to me. Va'anochi holech hariri, because I go without child. I don't have a child to carry on my work. You know, Avraham Avinu spent his life trying to bring God consciousness into the world. Avraham Avinu spent his life trying to bring morality, monotheism, chesed, kindness into the hearts, into the minds of his fellow human being. That was his work, and he wanted that to pass on. He wanted that to go on to the next generation. He wanted somebody to really pass the mantle on to continue that work. Without that, Avraham Avinu says, I'm sure the reward in the world to come is great. I'm sure the reward in this world is also wonderful. But Anochi holech hariri. Hashem turns to Avraham Avinu and he says, not so. You will have a future. You will have a legacy. And at the end of the Parsha, we're told, Ki bi Yitzchak yikari l'chazara. Yitzchak will be that future. Yitzchak will be that legacy. He will carry on your work. Fast forward to the end of this week's Parsha, and Hashem turns to Avraham and he says, 37 years later, he says, Avraham, take that future, take that legacy, and put it on the altar. So Avraham Avinu was going through this trial, and he recognizes that if he follows through, if he actually does what Hashem says to do, then there goes his future. There goes his legacy. There goes all his work. There goes the only thing he truly considers precious, which is bringing God consciousness into the world, into the future as well. And that future was about to be burnt on the altar. Of course, we know that Hashem stops him before he slaughters Yitzchak, and something happens right there and then. And that's where I want to draw your attention. The pasuk goes on to say, Vayehi acharei advar me'ela, and it came to pass after these things. This was an outgrowth of these things. And it goes on to say that a very special woman was born, a very special girl was born. And that, of course, was Rivka, the future wife of Yitzchak. What's going on here? Says the Or HaChaim HaKadosh something incredible. You know, when Yitzchak was brought on the altar, there actually was a piece of him that did die. There was a piece of him left behind. As our sages say, parcha nishmaso, there was an aspect of his neshama, there was an aspect of his spiritual essence that actually left him. It went into the aisle that was brought instead of him, but there was an aspect of Yitzchak that left. And in its place, there was a new neshama that was put into his body, into his being. That new neshama was very different than the previous neshama. Our sages tell us the previous neshama, his previous spiritual essence, was unable to have children. He simply was unable to have any future. Rivka was only born after, Rivka only comes into the picture after he gets his new neshama. That new neshama now is able to have a future, is able to have a wife, is able to ultimately bring that legacy into reality. Avraham Avinu thought that by bringing Yitzchak up on the altar, he was destroying any future. But that's what God said, so he was going to listen. He was destroying any legacy, but what could he do? That's what Hashem wanted. But the reality was that nothing could be further from the truth. That by bringing Yitzchak up on the altar, he wasn't destroying the future, he was creating the future. It was through the act of Yitzchak being brought on the altar, that parcha nishmaso, that the old neshama that couldn't have children, that couldn't have a future, left him, and a new neshama takes its place. Often in life, we find challenges. Challenges personally, challenges as a people. But what we realize looking back with 2020 hindsight, is that the challenges are not simply, it's not simply that whatever successes come in life come in spite of the challenges, but often it's the challenges themselves that produce that greatness. It's the challenges themselves that produce the future. Shabbat Shalom, good Shabbos, each and every one of you.